Hi, how are you doing today? I was out at the weekend. I was out at a pub with my boyfriend. So yes, folks, it is perfectly possible to go to pubs, bars, clubs, meals, whatever, when you're sober. It gets easier and easier over time. And in the end, you don't bat an eyelid. You don't think about drinking. You don't pay any attention to the booze behind the bar, to the booze your friends are drinking. You don't give it any energy or thought at all. So I was out at this bar. I was having a conversation with my boyfriend and an old friend of ours. And she's someone who has attempted to stop drinking several times. She's got an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And she's quite open about it. And we were having a conversation about it. She was thrilled to be drinking tonic water that evening. I was drinking tonic water as well. So we kind of did that mutual cheers thing. Giving each other knowing looks and winks and what have you. And she was really happy that she'd managed to stay sober that evening, and it had really helped her that I'd gone along. So we were having a conversation about, when we were drinking, the kinds of things that would make us feel ashamed and consume us with guilt and regret. And in the middle of our conversation, my boyfriend kind of looked across at me and he just said, no, that was it. Sorry, I'm getting the story all wrong. He was drinking pints, so he was on like his second pint, and I looked across at him and I just said, oh, I guess you want me to drive home then? And he just looked at me and smiled and said, yeah, is that okay? And I said, yeah, of course it is. And the three of us were kind of continued the conversation about drinking, not drinking, staying sober. And I commented that it's just so funny now looking back at it, our roles have completely reversed in that in the old days, in my drinking days, I would never have driven home from anywhere. It was always him driving home. And I would always engineer it in some way, shape or form, that I would get to drink and he would be the one that had to drive home if we ever went anywhere. And I was relaying this to my friend and saying, and now the tables have turned and I'm the one that always drives home, because he's always had a couple of pints. The difference, of course, being that he doesn't have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. So his version of drinking and not being able to drive home is very different to my version of drinking and not being able to drive home. But I was just making a point innocently about how our roles had reversed and how I was now the designated driver wherever we went. And we were all having a laugh about this. And then he looked round to me and he sort of came into the conversation and was saying to my friend and me, he made the point that when I was drinking, yes, I would engineer it, that he would always drive home. But he said that I used to give him the choice. He said that I would say, oh, I'm quite happy to drive home if you want me to drive home. He said, but then I would proceed to drink. And when he questioned me, I would say to him, yeah, but I'm fine to drive. And he was kind of joking about it. And he was saying, you would say you were fine to drive. He said, but I used to choose to not drink or to only have one and drive us home. Because he said the way I looked at it, it was that or die, potentially. And he was laughing about it. This was all said kind of good-humouredly. And as he was sort of relaying this memory of how I used to be when I was drinking and the fact that I used to engineer it, that I would carry on drinking even though I'd said I'd drive home, it brought back the memory for me. It brought back this memory and I could actually remember being out and being so steely determined to drink and nothing was going to get in the way of me drinking, not even having to drive home. And I remembered knowing full well that he would not want me to drive home if I'd had a couple of drinks. If I'd had a few drinks, he would not want me to drive home. And so I would deliberately have a couple of drinks, reassure him that I was fine and I was quite happy to drive home and I wouldn't have too much more to drink, yada, yada, yada. But knowing full well that he was not going to be happy with that, quite rightly, he wasn't going to be happy with that. And so he would not drink, so I'd be able to drink and he would drive us home. And this happened every single time. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you is because I was sort of innocently having this conversation. He made a throwaway comment and a joke about, how I used to say I'd drive home, but how I'd always used to drink. And it took me back to a memory that I'd forgotten. I'd completely forgotten that that's how manipulative I would be. I'd completely forgotten that drive to drink being so strong that it would get in the way of reason, of rationality, of logic, of safety, of my relationship with my partner. It would get in the way of absolutely everything. And I'd totally forgotten how that felt until he told this story and kind of reminded me of just how devious I used to be with alcohol. And so momentarily I sat there thinking, blimey, I had totally forgotten that that's how I used to feel, that that's how I used to think, that that's how I used to be. And we had a little bit of a chat about it and we kind of laughed it off. But it had pinned me to my chair with kind of shame and regret in the moment that he was telling the story, as this memory kind of flushed over me of exactly what I used to do and how I used to behave. And it was a really timely reminder of, just how insidious alcohol became for me, that it was a really insidious, sly and dangerous friend of mine. And that I allowed it to take so much control over me that I'd got to that stage that I was putting my life at risk. I was putting my boyfriend's life at risk when we went out. And so for a moment, I was kind of pinned to my chair with regret, remorse and shame. Kind of processed it, worked through it, absolutely fine afterwards. But it left me thinking this might be a really useful thing to share. And the bit that I think is useful to share is the fact that I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten what that was like. I'd forgotten how bad I used to be. And in sharing that with you, the point of sharing that with you is that the longer you stay sober, the more removed you become from the person you used to be. And in fact, you get to the point where you're so far removed from the person you want to be, the behaviour you used to do when you were drinking, your actions when you were drinking, you become so far removed from that, so distant from it, that you don't even remember it. You've forgotten that that used to be part of your behaviour, part of who you were. And if somebody had told me that in the early days when I first stopped drinking, it would have been so motivational, because I was still in those early days of living sober. I was still full of shame, full of regret, full of guilt about myself, about my behaviours, about my actions when I was drinking. And it would have been really helpful if somebody had pointed that out to me, that actually the longer you stay sober, the better you feel about yourself. You become more of the person you want to be, and you behave less and less in the ways that alcohol used to kind of make you behave. And so I just thought, well, if that would have been useful for me to know, if that would have been motivational for me to know at the time, that would have inspired me to keep going. Maybe that's a useful thing to share. And that's what I wanted to share with you. The fact that I had a bit of a kind of slap in the face reminder of how bad I used to be when I was drinking, that kind of momentarily shocked me. And I thought, oh yeah, God, I really used to be that person. That's what I used to do. And I went from that into reflecting on it and thinking, I've come so far now that I've forgotten all of that. And, I don't even think about it anymore. So the shame, the regret, the guilt, all of that just kind of goes as you become more and more the person you want to be. So I hope that's motivating for you. If you want more tips, advice, information, enthusiasm for living life sober, you can subscribe to my channel. I'll look forward to catching up with you next time. But in the meantime, let's go get sober together.